Welcome to Wildly Capable with Kate, a podcast made for those looking to unleash their wildest capabilities. I'm your host, Kate DeRocher, a dating, relationship, and self-worth coach on a mission to help people build better relationships, starting with the one they have with themselves. In each episode, we'll dig deep, turn inwards, and embark on a transformative journey. Together, we'll break free from unhealthy patterns, rip through self-limiting beliefs, heal past wounds, and build unwavering self-worth, all to create healthier relationships as a result. Get ready to explore the wild, untapped potential within you. Are you ready to see just how wildly capable you are? Subscribe now and join us on this empowering adventure. Remember, your wildest capabilities await. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Wildly Capable with Kate, the podcast made for those looking to unleash their wildest capabilities. In this podcast, we talk about everything related to relationships and how to build better relationships. And recently, my fiancé, Bobby Hobert, released his own podcast episode about how he released and faced his shame after a breakup that him and I went through. So if you know our story, Bobby and I were dating for roughly a year, and then we broke up for a little bit and then ended up getting back together and repairing our relationship, and we're now engaged and living in Texas today. But our journey to repairing after that breakup was a whole story in itself. It was anything but easy. And it was especially challenging for Bobby because he was the one who chose it. I had to heal from that happening, and he had to heal from the decisions that went into making that happen. And he so bravely and courageously shared on his podcast, Bearded Man Podcast, about how he did that, about the things he did, about what he was feeling at that time, and just about how him and I came back together stronger than we were even before. So I thought it would be appropriate to share his podcast episode with all of you here on Wildly Capable. It is incredibly real and vulnerable and so just powerful of him to be able to share that story from a healed place where he is today. We have been together for over a year since that breakup. We've gotten engaged. We got another dog together. We live in Texas. We moved states together. So clearly our story is one of success. And there's still things that we're repairing and things that we're healing and things that we're growing through together. There always will be. That's what a relationship is. You are constantly learning and growing together. But Bobby and I both made just really beautiful, massive strides in our healing journeys, both internally and together through our breakup and repair process. And I would love for you all to get to hear his perspective instead of just always hearing mine on how exactly that went and what it looked like. So keep listening to hear Bobby's story of how he released shame and repaired after our breakup. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Today's episode, I want to focus on navigating shame and guilt. And this has been something that I've been navigating behind the scenes since Kay and I started to rebuild our relationship in January of 2023. Now, the good news is that we are now engaged 16, 18 months later, and we are in a happy, healthy relationship that has evolved and transformed so much since we went on a break and started to rebuild our relationship at the top of last year. But let me tell you, it has been quite the journey, not only for both of us, but more so today, I'm just going to share my perspective, my experiences, and my learnings, because guilt and shame have been two of the biggest emotions that I've had to work through behind the scenes. And I really haven't shared a lot of this story and my experiences going through this breakup publicly. We did a podcast on her show probably about 6 months ago at this point, kind of talking about the breakup. And that was really the first time publicly chatting it through. And so I really wanted to finally take a moment to kind of share some of the learnings and lessons that I've been navigating. So January of 2023, we are coming off a 2-month break, and there was a lot of damage that was done. Now, to be honest, looking back, I don't think 99% of people or relationship would have made it through what we went through. I think most people may have just given up or not been willing and wanting to put in the work. And I'm so grateful that we did. And I do recognize that it was a lot of work and we wouldn't be the relationship we are in today. But also, I just know that maybe this episode could also be that one little push for someone that is on the brink of not rebuilding. Maybe this will be the thing for them that gives them the green light. But I have come a long way with letting go both the shame and the guilt, but it really has not been easy. I'm not fully detached from these emotions and feelings that come up from this experience, and I'm working and trying my best to surrender myself to them and change my relationship with them, but I just know it just takes time. And even hearing the word Bali, which is where this breakup started, and I'll get into that shortly, it still triggers this experience all over again. And I'm trying to change that relationship with even hearing the word Bali or hearing someone reflect on their experience of what it was like traveling there. I still have work to do with accepting it. I think a big step of this healing journey is actually going to be sharing this and speaking my truth so that I can get it out of me. I can let it move through me. That has been a huge process of healing through this, has been not only speaking with, Kate and therapists or loved ones, but also I think this is a great opportunity to share with my audience and the people that listen, people that know me or see me and watch me. So much of the content's about optimizing your life and building the life you want for yourself, but this is such an important part that maybe it's not as sexy and fun and tactical and time management hacking, but it's part of being a human being. And I would be doing a disservice to myself and a disservice to all of you that listen if I didn't take the time to carve out and share important episodes like this. So that's why we're here today. That's what we're going to be diving into. And let's just keep on going and see kind of how this unfolds. So let's bring it all the way back. November of 2022. I went to Bali with a friend of mine, and this trip was inspired actually by Kate. She and I, when we first started dating, she was always asking me, where have you traveled? And I hadn't had a long list. And long story short, I ultimately decided I want to go to Bali. I had a friend of mine who had a lot of experience traveling there. So we book a trip, and we also schedule it so that a little bit more than a quarter of the way through the trip, Kate was going to join us for a few days on the trip because she had wanted to go to Bali. And so a couple days in, there's a night where my buddy and I are out kind of exploring, checking out different bars and clubs, and I'm texting Kate and we get into an argument. And this argument, we go back and forth, we're on the phone, and I kind of just snap, and I tell her to not come on the trip, and that ultimately we kept fighting, and then I just came to the realization that maybe we should break up. Now, mind you, this is literally 10 hours before she's getting on a plane to come visit me. Her bags are packed. She's ready to go. She's literally about to leave her home in 10 hours to get on a flight to travel across the globe to see me. And that's where a lot of the shame and guilt comes from, was just that single decision, and how horrible of a human being could you be to just rip that trip from someone like that. And yeah, so there's a lot of guilt even in just that singular moment, and shame in that. And I think understanding the reason of why I did that in that moment was ultimately I was an avoidant. I was someone that, had been single for 10 years. I was so used to freedom. I was so used to not dealing with conflict. And my perspective on conflict was so much different then than it is now. Back then, it was like conflict is a red flag that you and your partner are not meant to be. Conflict present day is like, oh, this is an opportunity to grow from each other. And I just snapped. I didn't want to deal with the responsibility of being in a relationship, doing the work. I also felt like then, like if the relationship is taking work, maybe this is a sign we're not supposed to be together. And I wanted to just be able to do what I wanted, and I didn't want to have to, worry about communicating to someone what I was doing. And I snapped, and I broke up with her. And instead of leaning into the conflict in that moment, which I absolutely could have, which is what I do now when those moments come up. I lean in instead of running away. I ran away. And my running away was saying, don't come on this trip. Let's break up. And that's what happened. So I then spent the next 8 days in Bali continuing to explore, experience. And it was on one spectrum, the most like eye-opening experience in my life because I was on the other side of the world. I'd never been to a place like Bali, and it's such a free-flowing world, just a lot of expats and a lot of people living by their own terms. A lot of people that have truly designed a life for themselves and are not attached to what others think. And I'm feeling that and I'm exposed to that. But then the polarity of also I'm going through a breakup, and it just was it was challenging for me to compartmentalize, like being in these dopamine environments, but also then when in stillness and by myself in my bedroom, like all these emotions hitting me. It was easy to distract myself during the daytime, but it was very hard when going to sleep and facing the reality of when I was alone of like, you broke up with someone and now you're going through that and you're communicating, and it was really, really not easy. So I get back from that trip, and then we spend the next 2 months, pretty much broken up. We had a few conversations about repairing. Kate was really, standing strong and just like, this is something we can work through. We have such a good relationship. We should really, chat through what this looks like and trying to fix it. And I was open-minded to that. I then had a call with a therapist, and one therapist, never spoke to her again, but it was just like, she wasn't even necessarily telling me what to do. She was just asking me questions. And once again, it got me scared. It got me avoidant. So I start to give Kate, some hope that we're going to rebuild. I have this conversation with the therapist, and then I'm like, nope, actually, I don't want to do this. Let's move on. So now we're back again to like spacing, having space. And once again, these moments are what lead to more guilt and shame down the line. And it wasn't until it was technically supposed to be our last kind of conversation. At least I think Kate had communicated like, this is the last time we're going to talk about this. And after this, like, I'm done. I'm not going to keep waiting for you. And funny enough, it was also the first conversation that I truly let go of my ego. And I listened to what she was saying. I was able to be in her shoes and kind of try to understand where she was coming from and all the thoughts, the emotions, the feelings. And it finally kind of hit me where I was like, wait, there's some room to grow here. So for me, what I walked away from that conversation was like, I don't think I will be able to live the rest of my life knowing that we could have done the work and actually saw this through and see where it takes us. So I knew that there was work that could be done that could fix this. Two, something she had said to me was like, no matter what happens next, your next relationships, this is going to repeat itself, this pattern. That also struck a chord with me too of like, once again, there's work for you to do here, Bobby. You could lean into this. You could stop pushing this off. You could actually do the work to repair this. And that's when I really was fully committed to repairing. And it took probably a couple of weeks to fully convince her that, yes, I was absolutely ready to do the work. And thank God she was open-minded to it and welcoming to it. But she was very like slow and steady, making me show that I'm actually there to do the work and that I wasn't just going to run away like I did 2 weeks ago saying, hey, I'm ready to do the work. Actually, no. She was actually making sure that she was protecting herself. And I kept showing her little bits of proof that I'm serious. I'm willing to do the work. I want to do the work. I want to see this through. I want to see what our relationship can evolve to. And so let's keep going. The next 6 months were not easy. There were a lot of trust that needed to be rebuilt. There were a ton of hard conversations that needed to be had. I read books like The Way of the Superior Man, Men's Work, The Masculine in a Relationship. I listened to podcasts. I slowed my life down from distractions, and I prioritized our relationship and rebuilding that. We did a few sessions of couples therapy to try to put us back on track. That was beneficial. But then after a couple, it was like, we don't really need this. We kind of have our own work that we need to do. I then started to do weekly therapy sessions, pretty much weekly for at least 6 months. And then I kind of started to break them up to every 2 weeks. Then it was like every, 3 weeks. Now, present day, it's like kind of when I need it. But it was during that process of repair and understanding myself, understanding why I reacted the way I did, and just really trying to understand childhood and how all those dots connect to the version of who I am today, how it molded me into who I am today. No for good or for worse, just neutral, just understanding why am I who I am today. And it was actually through that process that I dug up the sexual assault that I had dealt with when I was a kid from one of my best friends with that I opened up about at the top of this year. So it was, I'm going through a repair from my relationship, and I'm also repairing myself, and I'm also starting to dig up some truths that I had hidden beneath so down deep below for so long. There was also one point I was literally grasping for help in any way possible, that I even was in the process of onboarding to a men's coach, and ultimately realized after the first session, like, there's way too much happening. I'm doing therapy, I'm reading these books, I'm working full time, I'm still trying to somewhat build my business. We're doing the couples therapy, and I just realized I can't, this is way too much at one time. And thankfully that man was willing and able to pull back the contract, give me my money back, which was so kind of him. So we were doing a lot of work within those 6 months. And that's where a lot of the shame and guilt was, starting to really come to light. And I think that's kind of how I grew more shame and guilt, because I think in real time when it was happening, I didn't like the fact that I was breaking up with her while I was in Bali, and I was pulling this trip from her, and I wasn't able to do this in person. I didn't like that. But as I started to understand the repercussions of those decisions and the way I acted and the way I responded, as I repaired myself, I felt like the guilt and shame grew, because I was actually able to fully see like everything from a different lens. And I had to repair myself, which grew the shame and guilt, which then gave me an opportunity to then start repairing the guilt and shame with time. So the reason that I felt this guilt and shame was, one is I felt terrible with how I handled the breakup. No questions asked. Like, I can only imagine if I was listening to this episode, and I'm not attached to people's opinions, perspectives, but like, truly, if I was listening to this episode of hearing someone, how they broke up with their partner, and hearing he dumped her 10 hours before she was getting on a flight to visit him on the other side of the world, like, I don't say this to be fun. It's literally like a Hollywood movie script, like, what? He did what? And that was really hard. That was a really hard pill for me to swallow in the moment, but more so as time went on. Another thing I felt shameful and guilty about was when we had broken up and we were separated for that 2 months, I had hit up other girls while we were separated through IG DMs or being flirty in Bali, and nothing ever happened. But the guilt and shame came from when Kate had asked me about that when we were rebuilding. I had said no. And I think looking back on it, part of that was I just didn't want to accept the reality of what I had done. And so I was trying to compartmentalize that version of me and just completely dissociate myself from it. And I realized now, and after so much time of work, that was something that was always in me, because I had dug and dissociated myself from the sexual assault. It didn't give me a pass. It didn't mean like, okay, it's okay, Bobby, that you lied about it. It's because of this trauma that happened when you were a child. It didn't give me the pass or the green light. It just gave me a different lens to understand why I acted the way I did, and thinking and believing truly that's where that came from. So, I had hid that, and ultimately that came to light, and those were tough conversations. I also didn't protect Kate or our relationship with certain friends. And I was getting a lot of opinions and feedback while we were in this limbo period of potentially trying to rebuild and then finally fully rebuilding. I was leaning, no disrespect to anyone and none of these people, but like I was leaning on support and feedback from people that had been single for years. Like I understand now, like I was leaning on the people that were closest to me at the time, but it wasn't the right people to seek advice from. And some of these people ultimately would gossip and talk trash and were very inappropriate in the things they were saying and the way they were communicating. So I ultimately lost friendships through the process too, which I think then also built some shame and guilt of what could I have done differently? Could I have spoken up more soon? Could I have protected the relationship and set boundaries to these people so it wasn't like this unspoken thing? Lost friendships in the process. I also began to admit that I had also hidden other truths about past girls I had dated or been interested in from my past. This is like before Bali. And this was something Kate was pretty upfront with when we first started dating. Like, hey, I don't need to know top to bottom, like your past history, but like if there's someone I should know about, please just inform me. And I didn't. I remember there's one time we ran into a girl that I had previously hooked up with at a shop on Abercrombie in Venice. And I introduced them. We kept going on with our day. And I, didn't give her any context to who that woman was when I could have just told her and we could have moved through and that was it. I hid that truth. I hid a lot of these truths because I felt like I was protecting the relationship, or I was, not trying to be attached to who I used to be or what that looked like. And so once again, I hid these truths and eventually they came to light. The other part of the shame and guilt was, once again, anytime I would hear the word Bali, I would feel terrible and I would feel like a knot in my stomach. Whether I was with Kate or not around Kate, it was this polarity of one of these wild, beautiful experiences of exploration and adventure that I had never done before, with also the time that I broke up with this girl that I loved and left her hang to dry while I was still traveling on the other side of the world for another 10 days. Like, it was a hard pill to swallow. And I felt like I couldn't escape it. Couldn't escape Bali. I feel like there were so many times in the last year and a half where the word would get brought up. Somebody would ask about Bali. I remember literally, I think we were flying back from Austin. It was on one of our 2 trips out here to see if this was the next place we were going to live. And I remember we watched Murder Mystery 2 with Jennifer Aniston and Adam Sandler. Or I think those were the 2 actors. I could be wrong. But they were literally on a flight to Bali. And I'm just in awe of, here we are on a plane watching a movie about a trip to Bali. It just was like, I'm being tested. Here it is. Here's your opportunity to grow through it, Bobby. And ultimately too, like, I'm not gonna lie, writing this outline that you're hearing right now was not easy. Most of these podcasts take, 45 minutes for me to just write an outline. This probably took me close to 2 hours, just so much overthinking and just feeling extremely uncomfortable. And it just hasn't been an easy process because, once again, this has been something I have been trying to work through. Now, before I go on, I do want to, this is a complete mindset shift, but I do have to kind of throw this out there. August 21st, 2 p.m. CST, I'm hosting the Optimize Your Life workshop. This is a workshop with the purpose to help you optimize your schedule, eliminate distractions, and achieve work-life balance. This is the second time that I'm running this workshop. The first time was fantastic back in June. One of the feedback that I got was a DM from Max. He said, yo, man, you killed that presentation. Flow was incredible. Info was insightful. Altogether, really solid. Thanks again, man. This workshop is free. If you are looking to optimize your life across the board, or maybe there's a certain aspect of your life, I would really highly encourage you to sign up. It's only going to be 60 minutes. But let me tell you, I'm jam-packing what I learned in 10 years in 60 minutes, and it's going to be so much value. So if that's of interest, head to bobbyhobert.com. You can go under group programs, and then you will see the Optimize Your Life workshop. Once again, it is free. Sign up there. I will send you a link to sign up and next steps. And once again, that is August 21st at 2 p.m. CST. Now, let's shift gears, get right back to where we left off. Ever since I was a kid, my mom always said to me, you are your own biggest critic, throughout my entire childhood. And I would always beat myself up so damn hard, whether it was, not doing good on grades with school, letting my parents down for something. It didn't matter what it was. I just would beat myself up. And while we were repairing and going through this breakup / into the rebuild, I beat myself up really badly. Not physically, but just mentally, so dark and so disappointed and shameful and guilty and overwhelmed and tired from just the lack of sleep that I was getting from, these long nights of tough conversations. I just beat myself up with how I handled the breakup. And also I beat myself up because I had let my partner down, the woman that I loved. I let her down, and that was really, really hard for me to accept. Now, there was a turning point just earlier this year when I really started to fully surrender, accept, acknowledge, and begin to let go of the shame and guilt. These emotions that have been so attached to me and with time, I've been really working through to let them go. But it wasn't until earlier this year that I feel like, okay, I'm actually starting to finally move through this. And I think that's because of a few reasons. I was honest with myself about how humans make mistakes. This doesn't mean we're allowed to make mistakes and live on our life and not deal with the repercussions of those mistakes. But I think there was a long time that I was in my own head of saying meaningful things like, you're an idiot. Why did you do this? Running that narrative on repeat over and over. And I just finally came to fully accepting and understanding humans make mistakes. And to be honest, there are people out there that have made very worse mistakes than I have. And I don't mean to compare like that, but it gives me such a different lens to view my situation. There's people that have done worse mistakes, have forgiven themselves, and have moved through it and rebuilt their life after. If they've done that, well, I damn well should and can do that for myself. So accepting that humans make mistakes was a huge unlock for me. I was also really proud of all the work that I had been doing to repair a relationship and better understand myself. Opening up on that sexual assault story, January of this year, was huge. That really was letting go of some trauma within me, but also just shame and guilt that was within me. So letting that go was huge. Looking at all the work I'd done with the therapist, all the tough conversations I had done with Kate, all the books that I was reading, I had and was and am always doing the work. And I think that was really, really helpful. Another huge part of kind of moving through the shame and guilt definitely was moving to Austin. This brought a new reality for me and for us. And we didn't move to Austin because of any of this. If anything, the timing was pretty right time, it all happened. But moving out of LA was something that Kate had flagged to me since we started dating. And it finally came to fruition while we were kind of getting towards a better side of this breakup. And, now sharing this out loud, I remember in January when we were even having these conversations about what rebuilding would look like, Kate was very honest with me. And she ultimately said, when my lease ends in August, I'm going to move out of LA. The year before, she had tested and tried, and she couldn't find the right next step, and she was just ready to move. And she ultimately told me, if you aren't open to the idea of moving, we probably shouldn't even bother to repair. We shouldn't go through this process. And what I said to her, and it was the truth, which was like, if we repair and we're at a better place and we can get through this, I absolutely will be open-minded to moving, even though I wasn't thinking about moving. My only ask was, can it be somewhere warm? I just didn't want to deal with the snow. And so we kept that in the back of our mind, like, let's focus on rebuilding this relationship. If we can get through this the next few months, or at least be on a better side, then we can talk about what this move would look like. And then thus brought us to Austin. Another thing that really helped me start to work through the shame and guilt was I no longer wanted to attach my identity, my worth, or my value to something that I did in the past. I preach this on podcasts and so in my short form content, like, your identity is not based on who you have been in the past. It's based on the actions, decisions that you make today. Because when you think like that, it allows you to make changes at any moment, at any time, when you feel the time to make those changes for yourself. And I was realizing I am attaching my identity, my value, my worth to someone that I used to be. I'm such a different person present day at the timing of recording this than I was in November of 2022 when I broke up with her while on the other side of the world. I have a lot more tools. I have a lot more grounding. I have a lot more understanding. I'm a different human being. So I needed to fully recognize and accept that I no longer need to attach myself to the old version of me. It's always going to be something that's a part of me, right? Like, it's part of my story. It's part of our story, but it doesn't need to be the main thing. I needed to accept that and let that be part of the past. Otherwise, it would be running on loop for the rest of my life, for the rest of our lives, which means that the shame and guilt would probably be attached to it as well. And lastly, I was just done letting myself feel bad about what had happened. I wasn't, like, it wasn't as if like, oh, it happened, so what, and I moved on with my life. Like, I checked off every box possible to rebuild from that, for myself and for our relationship. And yes, as I've said, like, the guilt and shame still is there, but it's much different than it was a few months ago, than it was a year ago. It will take time to work through it, but ultimately I had to be honest with myself and say, I'm done letting myself feel bad. I'm ready to pass through this. I'm ready to let it go. And that was huge. So even at the time we were recording this, truthfully, I'm probably at a 90% of at peace with the past and what has happened and the breakup in Bali and the lying of the past truths, of the hiding things, all of that. And there's still that 10% of being uncomfortable, but I'm okay with that, because all I know is as long as I'm continuing to move through it, it will change with time. And I can feel it even recording this podcast with you all today. I think some of the biggest lessons that I've taken from this experience would be conflicts are opportunities for you and your partner to work together. I completely shifted my view on conflicts. Like, any conflict that Kay and I had up until before we broke up in Bali, to me, like, truthfully, I was like, is this a sign we shouldn't be together? Because I'm the one that's coming from 10 years of being single. And the last girlfriend I had before that was for 3 months in high school. So truthfully, this was the first real relationship I had ever been in. So I have no context to what a relationship really looks like on the inside. All I have to compare to is what I see outside looking in from most people, which, as we know, you're just seeing, don't judge a book by the cover. I was judging the book by its cover. I'm basing it off of what I see in Hollywood and in movies and in TV shows. So previous to the breakup, it's, oh, we have conflict. Is this a bad thing? To now, these are just opportunities for us to grow, to come together, to work through. Like, it's inevitable. You're two human beings coming together. There's inevitably going to be things that you rub each other the wrong way, you bump heads, but these are just opportunities for you to grow from. Number 2 is, in order to move past shame and guilt, I need to surrender to what has already happened. The guilt and shame only continues to linger while I allow myself to live in the past. That's the only reason it still can be in present day, is I keep attaching myself to the to the past. And that's why it was so difficult to even write this outline, because I had to put myself in the past. I had to recall all of these lessons, these learnings, and these moments along the way. But ultimately, if I can surrender and accept what has happened and be in the present moment and not be attached to what has previously happened, then I can move through the shame and the guilt. Number 3 is just be honest. It's the only way through. That was part of the reason why I was so afraid to be honest in our relationship is I was scared of the conflict. And I didn't want to deal with the conflict because I was an avoidant, or the conflict is red flag. We're not in a good, healthy relationship. But the truth is, the honesty is the only way through. It's the only way through to growth. It's the only way through to the other side of a love, of a really passionate and caring relationship. You have to be honest, and that's the only way through, because eventually the honesty and the truth will shine. They will come out to light. Your shadow will be shown into the light, and it's not easy. There have been more times than I can count since we've started the repair where I've had to share uncomfortable truths with Kate of things that I forgot about. I had detached myself from past versions of me, whatever. And I've shared it with her. And thank God that she has met me with open arms and love and care and given me the space and time to work through that. And number 4, having people to express my thoughts and feelings to has been so important and necessary. If I was to have gone through this journey not having shared it with therapists or working it through with Kate, or there were 2 specific friends that I reached out to in this process that had healthy long-term relationships that I leaned on for support maybe once or twice. And just getting some of those initial feedbacks and thoughts were huge and added just more fuel to the fire of like, we can rebuild this. This is what we need to do. So having the right support system has been important. And if I had tried to do this alone and by myself, it would have been really, really tough. So I'll say this: if you're someone that is navigating or dealing with your own shame or guilt for whatever the reason, whether it's a breakup, whether it is anything under the sun, I think the most important steps to move through them would be this. Number 1 is, like I was just saying, share your thoughts and emotions with someone. Could be a therapist, could be a friend, could be a partner, could be a family member, anyone. We need you to get these thoughts, these emotions out of you. Stop letting them run on repeat in your mind, and find someone to share it with. Find someone. Number 2 is audit the situation. Why did things happen the way they did? Right? And even doing this auditing, try to detach yourself from it. Don't let your emotions get caught up. Just see it as black and white. Right? It's so easy for us to give advice when our friend comes to us and we can see the situation so clear, like you should do this, you shouldn't do that. But when it's our life, our emotions, there's so much happening. So try to be the person giving advice to yourself, or not even just giving advice, but like thinking through these questions, like why did things happen the way they did, right? Understanding and just trying to just take yourself back to the moment of where the shame and the guilt is coming from, and just try to ask yourself, why did it happen the way it did? Knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently, right? Thinking about from that moment till now, what have you learned? What are the steps that you would have done? What actions would you have done differently? And then, is there any actionable steps that you can take moving forward to prevent this from ever happening again? What can you do differently moving forward? And think about what are those steps that you can take so that you can learn and implement the next time if this ever does happen. Just the way I was kind of reflecting on conflict. Previous me would want to run away from it and not deal with it, or current me is I lean into it. And I'm not perfect. I'm not immediately rushing in for the resolution immediately, but I've gotten a hell of a lot better than I was just 12 months or even 18 months ago. So the third step would be acknowledge that all humans make mistakes and you're not alone. That's a big one, big one. Whatever you're feeling that guilt and shame for is okay. You're not alone. We've all made mistakes. And fourth and final one, take what you've learned and apply it in the future. Take anything that you've learned in this episode, take what you've learned from your own processing of your own shame and guilt, and apply that in the future, and that will make the difference in you. If you enjoyed this episode, All that I ask is you please take a moment to review it on whatever platform you're listening in on, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, you name it. It really, really does help. But seriously, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode. I feel a lot more relieved at the end of this than I did going into it. I felt pretty nervous, but ultimately just told myself, hit start recording and kind of see where it goes. And, like I said at the top of the episode, I am human like all of you. I don't know what your interpretation, perceptions are of me, but I'm just a human being that's trying to figure it out as he goes and is going to be unapologetic about sharing those lessons and learnings along the way. So I will continue to provide you all with content that will continue to help you design your life where it's aligned with your priorities and goals. And I think the only way that that happens is by auditing yourself and doing the deep work that sometimes is not comfortable and easy and fun to do, but it's necessary in order for you to propel yourself into the life that you want for yourself, that you so badly deserve. Thank you for tuning in. See you all in the next one. It's the Bearded Man Podcast.